So I'm Ben Jolly from Manaaki Whenua, Land Care Research, and I'll hand over halfway through to Jan. I think we're just going to give an overview of remote sensing research at Manaaki Whenua. We've got a fairly long history of remote sensing and quite a few projects, so we've just sort of selected a couple of more interesting ones, I think. Most of our work is around land cover and land use in New Zealand, and a lot of it is at regional or national scale, which sort of by necessity means we're using a lot of satellite data, but then also working to fuse this with aerial and UAV to sort of get the best result we can. Sometimes we manage to get down to Antarctica virtually, and so I'll cover a little bit of that as well. But yeah, so most of this work happens on the NESI HPC, which gives us the ability to do all the scale work. And then Jan's also going to talk about some of our growing AI capacity. So I guess the crown jewel of the data sources we use is the Sentinel-2 archive, which is sitting on NESI for us. So it's, yeah, every image taken since 2016 with automated cloud masks adds up to about 100 terabytes. The automated cloud masks are really key in this, just the sheer number of images we wouldn't be able to mask them manually. And so a lot of work went into that a few years ago, trying to get that sorted. Sentinel-2 doesn't have a thermal band in it, which made the existing cloud masking we had difficult, so we had to come up with a new approach. And I think Jan might have a paper on that at the end. So the processing chain is pan, sharpen, reproject, mask, and then the TOA reflectance to radiance and BRDF correction, and then correcting to the bottom of atmosphere, surface reflectance, both terrain corrected and not terrain corrected. And the terrain correction makes it easier for some of the automated analyses that we have to run. In terms of not having to account so much for slope and aspect with respect to spectral signatures. So having the archive on the HPC allows us to investigate individual pixels through time. So this is a single pixel near Te Anau, looking at the yellowness index of some beech forest, trying to find out if and when the forest masts or flowers. The orange line is a modeled value for the pixel. So multiple sine and cosine terms for inter and intra-annual variability. And we're looking for significant deviations from that during springtime. So which is that highlighted few points there. So if we can take this for one pixel and then scale it up to 4.2 million hectares over 5 years, we get something like this, which is a map of detectable beech flowering from Sentinel-2 imagery. And so we were doing this in order to help DOC with some of their targeting for predator control. Some other projects, so Jan was working on the Wellington inventory of tall trees, which he ran over the region using automated crown segmentation, and found 286,000 native trees more than 30 meters tall and 7,000 more than 40 meters, and I think it was something about over 1 million non-native trees over 30 meters tall. Lots of work with Cody mapping and monitoring recently with Jane Meeforth leading that in collaboration with Henning Budenbaum. So this was individual tree level classification at forest scale using a combination of LiDAR and WorldView 2 satellite. So fusing those together, but then also working with hyperspectral data and then multispectral. And one of the issues, of course, with dealing with any of this at scale, especially in difficult terrain like a forest, is getting enough ground data to kind of back up or train your models and back up your maps. And so one way we got around that without having to visit all the trees is stereo interpretation, so sort of much more old school remote sensing, but of multispectral imagery, so from the HIRAM sensor that Auckland Council flew. And that was an interesting exercise, kind of finding the kit we needed to get that set up, and digging through some of the older software we had. Also work with mapping physionomic types for forest types, and fusing SAR, optical, and airborne LiDAR as well. And the LiDAR really is key for some of these. The optical gets you a lot of the way there in terms of the accuracy, but yeah, the LiDAR got it from 72.5 essentially to about 80% accuracy. And then also work with bare ground mapping for winter forage grazing, which, like anything in remote sensing, sounds like it might have been easy to start with, but was actually more difficult than we might have thought. But yeah, using that time series with the automated cloud masking to look at paddocks through time to see which ones were becoming grazed down to the ground, and then a lot of manual accuracy assessment and validation as well. So a project that I'm also working on is building a data cube of Antarctic remote sensing data, and integrating field observations as well into that. So it's mainly focused on sea ice in the Ross Sea region. That map there is a count, so number of days of open water in the ocean, where blue is more and grey is less. And that has all feeds into a whole lot of other sort of atmospheric, but also biological or ecological science. And also working with Pierre around creating a gapless land surface temperature product over the entire continent. So that's been done. I just have to reprocess it on Nessie with the latest data that's come through from Modus. So that is using spatial and temporal interpolation, although interpolation is probably doesn't quite do it justice, to fill in the gaps where there's lots of cloud, to build a now almost a 22-year record of land surface temperature. And Jan, do you want to take over?
Yep, thank you, Ben. If I could maybe share my screen so I can flick through.
Yeah, go for it.
And so thanks, Ben, for the introduction and talking through some of our previous research. Now I would like to share with you some of our ongoing research and sort of advances over the last year or so. Basically, convolutional neural networks, which is one type of deep learning, offers nowadays great opportunities for improved mapping of land cover change, and also for mapping individual objects in remote sensing imagery. And traditionally, most of our analysis was based on physical models and more traditional machine learning techniques such as random forest classification, object-based classification techniques using machine learning. So we see that there's a great opportunity here to improve our methods. And as Ben already showed you, we at Manaaki Whenua host a wide range of data sets that are basically ideal for such deep learning tasks at very large scale, including land cover data, environmental layers, soil maps, and lots of Sentinel-1 SAR and Sentinel-2 image mosaics at the daily, monthly, or annual scale. And also lots of LiDAR data at the regional scale in New Zealand from airborne LiDAR, that is. And so now we're faced with the problem that we sort of need a flexible and operational workflow that is able to map, do our mapping tasks at the local level, regional level, and also at the national scale, which are all quite hard problems. So we created over the last year or so a pipeline that is fit for purpose for lots of our projects and is reusable also for future projects, which runs on the New Zealand HPC, and also it's able to run on our local computers with and without GPU support. So it ingests quite flexibly very large volumes of image stacks, but also all sorts of geospatial layers in various formats. And it includes some nice features that we like. The main techniques that we employ are, on the one hand, instance segmentation of objects, and here we use a technique called mask RCNN, and the other one is a semantic segmentation of different classes in images. We mainly use UNet64 structures and res unit structures for that. The overall workflow of this pipeline is fairly straightforward. So if you have any sort of image stack, for instance, multiple bands from Sentinel-2 or an elevation model and various bands from worldview, then you have a label file, which is basically a geospatial layer of training data. Then you have a, reduce this one here. Then the pipeline first chunks it up into small image chunks that can be fed into a neural network. Then we have a training stage, a cross-validation stage, where we basically are able to extract lots of useful error statistics and also error visualizations, which is actually one of the most important aspects, to actually look at the resulting images, not just the results, but also the cross-validated images and the number of true positives, true negatives, and so forth. And then we have the prediction stage. And now I would like to show you a couple of experiments, some of our examples over last year where we applied this pipeline. One example is looking at individual tree mapping for an urban area, in that case, Wellington city. And here we used mask RCNN to detect individual tree segmentation, or tree crown segmentation, in fact, and map all the trees in the city. And if you keep zooming in into our result here, you can see that it works quite well to delineate the extent of the tree crowns at the individual object level. So that's a massive data set, basically. And for another project, we looked into semantic classification of multiple land cover classes in an urban area. As Ben mentioned earlier, we work, lots of our work is around 3D point clouds as well. And here we use basically the point cloud labels as input to a UNet semantic classification of aerial photography. And on the top image here, you can see one example of aerial photography over a city. And our model is done basically in a very simple case to classify this image into ground, tree canopy, and buildings. And we achieve quite high accuracies. So working
2 minutes to go.
Yep, thanks. Just a couple of more examples. We also looked at mapping forest destocking, again at the individual object level, and we achieved accuracies of 95%, which is higher than what we achieved with traditional learning techniques, such as random forest models to classify individual objects. But the biggest advantage is not only the increase in accuracy at the object level, but also to actually get the prediction probabilities in a spatial domain out of the neural network. So it gives us the opportunity or the possibility to actually look at probabilities across the image, not just at the object level. And that's really useful for more in-depth analysis. We also looked at mapping landslides using our algorithm. Here we used multi-band worldview data and a digital elevation model. Another experiment looked at mapping land cover. So you're probably familiar with one of our main output layers, which is the New Zealand land cover database. And here we looked into using this layer as training and replicate this using a neural network approach instead of manual mapping. And this was also quite successful. And yeah, Ben mentioned earlier, if you would like to know more about our general workflow, how we process and ingest and pre-process satellite imagery of Sentinel-2, there's a paper out from last year that basically shows you how we use single image cloud masking that feeds into a multi-temporal cloud masking to actually, and not just cloud, but also cloud shadow masking. So it's quite a involved process, and we mostly use open source tools for that. So it's basically a neat open source workflow stacked together to come up with a quite thorough cloud detection and to generate an analysis ready product. Another paper I would like to share with you, if you're interested, is a map of beech forest at a national scale in New Zealand, where we basically also use the temporal information of spectral information from Sentinel-2 to map beech forest in New Zealand. And that's it from me. Thank you.